Not feeling well.
I just have, it's only. All right, I'm going to call this May 8th, 2025 meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission to order. And with the first item on the agenda being the approval of the agenda, does anybody have any changes that they would like to recommend or? And if not, I will take a motion in a second.
I move to approve the agenda.
A second. And all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, next is approval of the minutes. Minutes seemed very comprehensive to me. Does anybody have any changes or comments? Then I'll take a motion in a second on the minutes.
Move approval of the minutes as presented.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sorry, opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, so next item is citizen comments on matters not on the agenda so I'll open the floor. If anybody from our audience would like to come up and make a comment about something not on the agenda, and seeing as there are no members of our audience rising to the occasion, I'm going to close public comments and open up new business. So the first item on the agenda is the ECCOA 2025-06, an application by Kim Hickman for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for Rockbridge Homes and Barns at 631 Waddell Street, tax map 35-1-2, owned by Rockbridge Homes and Barns. Arnie, do you have a staff report?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. Rockbridge Homes and Barns recently purchased the property at 631 Waddell Street, and it is in the C2 zoning district and therefore also in the entrance corridor overlay. They have a request for two 12-inch by 12-inch vinyl window decals and a 7¼ foot by 3¼ foot by 3/4 of an inch thick double-sided post-mounted freestanding sign at the base of the parking lot. The proposed freestanding sign is the same size as the previous freestanding sign and will be located in the raised planter shown in the photograph on that page of your staff report, which is page 104. All three signs will feature the business logo and address in red and black on a white background. Additional sign details are included in your application material. Staff does find that this meets the zoning criteria. And if I'm not mistaken, the signposts are even going to be reutilized from the previous sign, and only the panel is changing for that freestanding sign up front that you see again in that sort of raised planter area on the photograph. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody? Thank you, Arnie. Okay, and do we have an applicant statement?
We have an applicant available.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for the applicant? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Okay, so I'll open public comment. If anybody wants to come up and make a public comment about this. Okay, closing public comment. Moving on to commission discussion and decision. Does anybody have any thoughts about this?
Sharp looking logo.
It is.
Yeah, definitely.
Any concerns? Okay. This one's going to be a quick one.
Yeah.
I think we need a motion then.
I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness for application ECCOA 2025-06 for a new freestanding sign at 631 Waddell Street as proposed by the applicant.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries. Congratulations. Okay, moving on to item B, zoning ordinance amendment 2025-04 on short-term rentals. Arnie, do you have a staff report? I bet you do.
This will probably take a little bit longer than
Yeah.
the last item. You do a little bit of enforcement, 3 spot inspections of 3 current operations for short-term rental, and found a couple of issues. And those issues are the logbooks that were not being maintained. They exceeded the maximum nightly rentals that are allowed. And again, for the R1, R2, and RLC zoning districts, you have to have a primary resident be the host, and they are limited to a maximum number of 104 nights. So they can rent out up to 2 bedrooms at a time. And then a subset of that, they can actually be gone and rent out however many bedrooms they have in the building for up to 45 nights. So there are maximum numbers for nightly rentals in those 3 residential zoning districts, and those who are being violated by all 3 of them. More minor issues also noted were dates of the trash collection were not posted. That's a requirement. Host contact information was not posted is also a requirement, so that obviously if there's an issue, they have the ability to contact whoever the host may be, particularly when they're doing a type B rental. And then oddly, at least in my observations, none of the 3 operators fully understood the distinction between type A and type B. And I think it's just because it hadn't been reinforced. So what I mean by that is they came in for registration maybe 5 years ago, doing annual updates, annual registrations since then. And they just didn't recall that there were type A and type B. There were a maximum number of nights for each of those. And so they just exceeded those amounts. So therefore, staff is recommending some amendments for your consideration to the short-term rental use and design standards, and specifically to the logbook, if we can keep this sort of in columns of logbook, and then enforcement capabilities. So unless there are further questions about how this started, I'll go ahead and start talking about the logbook.
I think that's.
The logbook is a requirement to be maintained for 1 year and made available for the city's review upon request. And it was not maintained for any of the 3 that we inspected. And not to belabor it, but again, there's a maximum number of nights. And also because there isn't much detail on how the logbook must be kept, they weren't keeping them. But then also one person in particular decided, well, after the fact, come to find out, I'll just create a spreadsheet and say this is the maximum number I've had for type A and type B. Come to find out, after they did provide their Airbnb yearly report, they broken down monthly, mind you, they exceeded. So I'm not confident that just having a spreadsheet. So I'm hoping for some help with requirements for logbooks, if they have to be paper logbooks, or if they are monthly reported to us, or if we have some other method to be more accurate with the logbook requirement. So the items to consider is, should the requirements for the keeping of the logbook for short-term rentals be strengthened in order to assist with compliance? On page 17, which I thought maybe be providing too much to you, but just sort of the sections of the ordinance. And then Leslie did recommend that we send out to you the entire short-term rental section so that you have that as a supplement. I think that was sent around yesterday, just so that it'd be easier for you to reference. The top of page 17 in your use matrix, we do have short-term rentals allowed by right in the R1, R2, RM, RLC, and C1 zoning districts. And those obviously come with about 3+ pages of use and design standards. And all this was adopted in that 2016, 2017 major update to the zoning ordinance. And since then, we've made 3 or 4 minor amendments already to short-term rentals use and design standards. So in the following sections, it's section 21 are the short-term rental, residential rental design standards. And sorry, when I say short-term rental, I mean short-term residential rental.
Yeah.
When we developed these, we already had short-term rentals, which is what's the movie box that's in front of CVS?
Oh, red
That
box.
thing, red box. So that's a short-term rental. So we had to make the distinction. So when I say short-term rental, I mean short-term residential rental. I don't think I'm always consistent in here. So just in item B, there's some registration requirements, and I'm just highlighted where logbook in particular in 5 and 10, and then staff recommendations at the bottom of page 17 of your overall packet. Potential solutions could include adding specific requirements detailing how a logbook must be maintained. In other words, we tell them in column A, you'll have to have, maybe the primary person who rented. And then in column B, if it was how many nights for type A, column C, how many types for type B. So we actually tell them what the requirements are. for the logbook. Second recommendation is require the number of type A and B rentals be reported monthly to the planning department. That was one option. If we go over to the next page, require the number of type A and type B rentals be listed each month on their monthly lodging tax form filed with the Commissioner of Revenue's office. Just thinking they're already handing in something. Why not just say on that form, you add type A and type B?
Mhm.
Come to find out, after we had compiled the staff report late Friday afternoon, Commissioner of Revenue made us aware, and she had just been made aware that will no longer be allowed starting in July. So option 3 is really not an option.
Can I ask you a question about that specific thing?
Mm.
It looked like the requirement was only when there was a third party involved that was providing the Commissioner of Revenue.
Yeah, true. So yeah, that's a good point. That I think you're right. And I did not, when I was discussing it with Karen that first time, that didn't occur to me. So there may be an ability to do this, but certainly not when there's a hosting platform or third party or however that was stated.
But so I did a little bit of digging around on Airbnb and I'm not an Airbnb host, so I don't know my way around it that well, but I didn't see that there would be an obvious way that you could tell Airbnb this is a type A or type B rental. And if we require the host to provide that information to the Commissioner of Revenue, that information would not be subject, I think, to that limitation. Do you understand what I mean?
No, could you repeat that, please?
Yeah. So if Airbnb can't say type A or type B, but we require that the owner of the property reports type A and type B, that information is sort of in a loophole of the requirement that the third party information is not transparent and can't be shared.
So we have the issue of, for when we're using a hosting platform or third party,
Yeah.
that we can now not require them to provide anything through the Commissioner of Revenue's office. And then we still had that little bit of a hiccup of, well, what if you don't use a platform of any type, because there's so many of them out there. So how can we address those? And then that is still sort of the portion that deals with the taxing and whatnot. So we still have the ability through the zoning side of it to still require, in my opinion, them to do it, but just can't do it through the Commissioner of Revenue's office.
I see. So they could just report it directly to you and
So that's why we still
take them out.
have,
Okay.
yes, option 4, in addition to the enhanced logbooks, require annual report be submitted. And we also, and I think 2 had the monthly report, and it doesn't have to be both. I'm just trying to figure out a way that they have to provide us with something, because it helps them also sort of keep track.
Totally.
Hey, I now have been reminded that I've got 45 nights maximum or 104 nights. And if they do it monthly, which may be a little bit onerous on them, maybe for us too, but then they'll have a better understanding of where they are with their maximum number and hopefully won't exceed it. And certainly won't exceed it as badly as the ones did that we spot checked. So yes, there's this sort of separation between what is on the tax side, Commissioner of Revenue sort of purview, and what we can still do and not do in the zoning side.
Right.
So Arnie, just to clarify also, though, the form that you're turning into the commissioner, or that we're talking about turning into you or the Commissioner of the Revenue, is different than the logbook, right? So
Right.
the
So
logbook's for a year, and then how does the city enforce the 104 and 45 nights after this year of the
we can only,
logbook being inspected or
can
whatever?
only really reach back for penalties and whatnot for the year. So that's why the logbook requirement was only for 1 year.
Right.
I'm not sure I'm answering your question yet, but and hopefully I will. So that was just while we're only having 1 year period, and therefore it might be good for them to report monthly, or before they register again for the next year, they tell us what their maximum was, so that we can ensure that they didn't exceed, and then go look at their logbook if we think that they did exceed.
Right.
they're 104 or
But so if they
45.
keep a good logbook for a year and then after their year, they're going over those nights, there's no way to know that?
No.
Okay.
So
And
could
I can't
you,
remember why we only had 1 year,
Right.
but I think that we followed fairly closely what was written up and adopted for Blacksburg. So I think there might be a good reason that it's not coming to me as to why that 1 year, but we also can't reach back but so far for enforcement. I mean,
Sure.
1 year seems reasonable, but I can't say, hey, show me your logbook for 5 years ago. Oh,
Sure.
you overstepped. And so I guess it's some
Right.
reasonable
Right.
standard there.
but if you required them to just keep a logbook every year, that you could, because then if you did have complaints over the course of the year, then I don't know, it just seems like it would, I don't see a downside to having a logbook just required every year and having them do monthly. Is it,
Yeah,
is
I
it?
think,
Separate things though, right? To the form you're talking about is
Oh, yeah,
very different than the logbook.
the logbook is just something that they're supposed to keep up with so that if there is a complaint, staff has the ability to go look in the logbook and theoretically count, okay, you have this many type A and this many type B.
Yeah.
But the tax form that is getting submitted monthly, the Commissioner of Revenue, is the bed tax or the transient occupancy tax,
Right.
whatever the
Right.
technical term is. So they are providing the Commissioner of Revenue this month. I've had X number of gross receipts. They're not
Right.
currently saying type A, type B, or how many. So it's just a gross receipts number that gets presented to the Commissioner of Revenue on a form. There's also the B poll tax that gets paid once per year, but we can forget about that for now. So there are definitely two different things. My hope was, which is now dashed, is that because they were already submitting a form to the local government on a monthly basis with their gross receipts so that the Commissioner of Revenue could calculate 8% off of that and take the tax, that we could at that same time have them just say, I've had this many nights of type A and this many nights of type B. But because of this new legislation that's starts in July that we were made aware of, we're not able to do that.
I do like the idea of just when they re-register each year for them then to present the data. And then if there's an issue, then going back, looking at the logbook. I think it's a little bit of a burden on the operator to do it monthly. And then it's a burden on the planning department. Are you really gonna, now that you have this data, are you gonna take time and record everybody's and keep a cumulative total?
I agree with you. Yeah.
Others sort of agreeing with that statement that
Mhm.
perhaps your option would be option 2?
And that,
Sorry, no, option 4 instead of 2.
Right.
have you had any problems with the wording of that? I mean, to maintain a logbook for 1 year, does that need to be retained for a year, up to a year after you?
We could certainly clear that up for
Okay.
the previous calendar year or
Right.
however. Yeah, that could definitely be clarified.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So is the logbook, so the way this reads, and this is maybe part of what I feel confused about, is a logbook must be maintained for 1 year. Is it just like the first year and then they don't have to do it
Let's
again?
clarify that.
Yeah, I think
It's for the year.
Every
that's
year.
Every year. Each calendar
Each,
year might
so,
be the way.
so I think that we need to make that
Mhm.
super clear.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, yeah, I think that's confusing.
It's confusing.
I was reading it as well as
Yes.
for 1 year.
Right. 1 year, year one.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Maybe that's why I was like thinking, yeah, okay.
For each calendar year, does that sound?
Yeah, a log must be maintained for each calendar year.
And retained for at
And
least one
retained.
calendar year
Yes.
after.
Yeah.
And then if you're also submitting numbers, they should jibe with the logbook. Right? So if they're
Right, right.
submitting these annual, it's an annual report for the previous year. In number 4.
And it would seem to me that also that where the privacy or whatever issue is on the revenue is not supposed to be, that those figures are not supposed to be shared with another department. It would seem as though the actual number of nights, that's not as,
Yes.
as much of a privacy issue perhaps. So
Right. Could
I don't,
you,
I don't see the
right.
problem with that.
And could you require them to submit like a report of how many nights from Airbnb without the amounts?
That's what I was thinking. I think the whole issue was the revenue
Right.
that they're
Right.
against rather. I mean, so it seems like within the city could still require that how many nights did you have A, how many nights did you have B, like, and turn it in on a yearly basis or however. But that's a separate thing than the new legislation, but I don't know.
I think it's the indication or the direction we're basically being provided by this new legislation is we need to take care of it on the zoning side.
Yeah.
Or annually for the next registration before it's done. And I just, privacy and all the other issues, can we report? We can also have our attorney look over that. This is news to us. So, and we have one other clarification that we have to send to them as well. But I believe the best way to handle this is just through the zoning side.
Right, but couldn't you require them to submit that to the zoning to the Airbnb report that doesn't have any financial information, just number of nights?
For
But
A
we
and
can
B.
see whether or not, but the other hiccup that you pointed out earlier also is we're unusual in this type A and type B.
Yeah,
Platforms, I don't think care whatsoever on how we have our locals. They're and another sort of example of how they are not as responsive. Previously, they only submitted a check to Karen Roundy, or Commissioner of Revenue, for the gross receipts or the tax on the gross receipts for all of their operators at the end of the month. And she didn't know which address, how many nights, when nights wouldn't have been part of it, but they're just not easy to deal with, I guess is part of the point. So I'm not sure that we could ever consistently get information out of them about type A and type B that we could probably rely on.
I'm actually,
Maximum number.
I'm wondering if it matters that, I mean, and it's sort of it's just the backup plan. Like you said, that you went to Airbnb and found out that it had been in fact rented many more nights than, so it's just sort of a check.
Yeah, we didn't get it from Airbnb directly. 'cause
You
they
got
would
it from
never
the owner.
respond right.
Right. That's what I mean, is that you would have the owner submit to you a report from Airbnb that they self-generate, that provides you with just the number of nights that it was rented.
If you did that with the logbook, then you could
Yes,
cross-reference it
exactly.
and be able to say like, this is clearly not accurate based off of.
At
Exactly.
least for totals,
Mhm.
not breaking down type A and
Mhm.
type B likely.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it wouldn't do the type A, type B, but
Just
at
like a
least it
second
would
check.
say, wow, they've rented for 300 nights this year.
Right. We had resistance from folks about submitting their Airbnb. No, it can't be done. And then surprisingly, you push, and then we got two of them to do it.
Right.
So it's possible.
I think if you just make it a requirement of being able to have extra people staying in your neighborhood, I mean, people can make a lot of money on their
Yeah.
houses, right?
So if I could summarize, in B5, adding to the logbook must be maintained for each calendar year and retained for one calendar year after that. Thereafter, I think it was the wording. I think everybody's sort of nodding their heads on that, so maybe that's acceptable. And then we haven't really spoken specifically in staff recommendation one about, I think we're talking around that, about sort of additional requirements. It sounds like you're accepting of 4, which says that at the end of the year, along with the registration for the next year, that they should provide us with something, and maybe even we add in there and your hosting platform annual report.
Mhm.
Maybe that gets added in where possible, or however we state that.
I think you have to make sure that it says without financial information.
So does that sound acceptable if we change that wording in 4 a little bit to state exactly what I just stated, which
Yeah,
is
I guess the thing to make clear is that for those who are using a hosting platform, that they don't have to re-register. Does the hosting platform count? I guess it's only a realtor if they go through a
right,
realtor,
it's
not
not-
the hosting
it's not the
platform.
platform.
Okay, so the folks who go through a realtor don't have to register. but they still have to maintain a logbook.
Correct. They don't get
Okay.
out of, there's item D, I think, in that 983 that they're still required to abide by all of our zoning requirements.
Yeah, okay, then, right.
In that register, they just don't have to pay for the registration, just so that we have a.
Okay, okay,
good.
so they
We've
do,
Yeah.
yeah,
We've been asking that they register and they don't need to register per the state code.
Yeah.
But that way that we have one listing of all of them, they're not paying for the registration.
Yeah.
So the $60 fee is not something they pay.
Okay.
But at least we have a good accounting of where they are, all
Okay.
of them as a total. So most of them, I don't believe anybody's actually refused outright that they wouldn't provide any. And our application is a one-page application for short-term rental. It's nothing onerous.
yeah, okay,
So we'll add something to 4 to say, and where possible, or however we come up with it, that the hosting platform annual report will also be provided.
Yes. Without financial information.
So if they have multiple platforms, they have to submit multiple platforms,
That's
right?
correct. Yeah.
I don't know how they keep that straight, but I think some people do that. So if somebody books for these nights, it also takes it off of the other. So I think there's some way of coordinating that.
Mm.
So yes, I think folks do use more than one hosting platform. Going back to number 1, would you like to see more specific requirements for the logbook?
Yes. That seems like a good
Mhm.
idea. I was wondering if you provide or could provide on the website a template,
Yeah, that would be nice,
Yeah.
I think.
just so that everybody can see exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Okay. If we come up with a template, doesn't hurt, I guess, that it's required or suggested, I guess required.
Could it be?
I think
put
as
it
long as
in
all the
here in
information.
the code is like an example or like suggested
Yeah,
or something?
Yeah,
Like it's a template to look at. I mean.
right. I don't know that you need to require it. I mean, I guess you could require them to use that, but I was thinking just as a template
Yeah.
that they could use
Suggested
so that you
template.
show them everything that is required,
Mhm.
that they have to provide. So it should have their name and the address of the property, for example, and the date, all that. Because people will provide you with like information that has no identification on it.
Okay.
So I would make it easy for folks.
We will work on that part of it then. Since we're making significant changes, I presume this is coming back to you again before we go to any sort of public hearing. I don't think I'm going to get a go ahead with the changes. I think you're probably going to want to see that. And it also gives me a little bit more time to get this through legal for an opinion or opinions.
Good.
Just also on the bottom of page 3 of 9, or what ends up being page 18, just as an example, B.C. with the underline there in red was one of the potential solutions for short-term rental operations in those 3 zoning districts. Limited number of maximum nightly rentals. The registration form shall provide the total number of type A and type B rentals for the rental for the previous year. Oh wait, I've confused myself. The registration form. Okay. So that takes care of the registration when they're registering. And the one I didn't cross out is the one at the bottom of the page. That's the one that's no longer the option.
Yeah.
Right.
In
Are you saying
10,
number 10 is no longer an option?
correct.
Arnie, where you said, is it worth saying, for example, in B3C, where it's in
Mhm.
red right now, just for clarity again, the re-registration, or because if somebody's doing this for the first time, they won't have that other
That's true.
information. Or does it say in there? Does it say that? Re-registration,
Mm.
Or annual registration.
renewal.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that takes care of that, I believe.
Mhm.
And then over on to 19, if we're ready to go over the, ultimately it's the obligation of the operator to make sure that they're not in violation of the short-term rentals and the zoning ordinance. So providing that monthly tally, as I already mentioned, or I think we're only talking about the end of year tally, is a way that perhaps helps them keep track and also for us to confirm at the end of the year before the new registration for the next year is issued. So I think we're
So you're
good.
saying that you'd rather have it at the end of the year as opposed to monthly?
I think that's what, I was just trying to provide options.
Okay.
One option was taken off the table. That's the Commissioner Revenue. The other option was monthly and the other option was annually. And I think your recommendation was more towards the annual as opposed to or in addition to the monthly.
Do you all have a preference? Would
I-
you prefer to have monthly so that you have better, more up to date
For us, it's
or
really
semi-annually or?
the idea of the logbook was to make sure when there was a complaint that we had a mechanism to go back and look. So getting it monthly, I think whoever said it, I don't think we're going to spend the time actually
Right.
going through and calculating, okay, so-and-so is up
Yeah.
to 39 nights.
Mhm.
So it's going to be a reaction from us. So I think it's okay at the annual to do that.
Mhm.
Worry perhaps just a little bit that if we have 39 of them now, and if they're all re-registering in a month and a half time, how much are we going to get squeezed potentially, depending on how many of these we have to look into
Right.
and confirm their number of nights, but we'll handle that.
So would it be helpful to have a semi-annual submission so that you could, sort of check on some of them?
I think we're flexible either way. I haven't given much thought until you just mentioned that. So maybe we'll give it a little bit more thought.
Yeah. And come back with
Yeah.
a suggestion.
But for right now, we'll stick to what we've heard
Yeah.
this evening on changes to the logbook requirements template and also changing number 4 a little bit. And that being the main recommendation. So 1 and 4.
I have a question about that. I noticed that some cities require Airbnb host owners to have liability insurance.
Mhm.
They require them to have a business license. And I just was wondering about that here in Lexington.
Business license and insurance. So on the business license side, we cannot require them to have a business license. The state tells us in 15.2983 that they have to register with our department.
Okay.
So they took that ability away from the Commissioner of Revenue to require a business license.
Okay.
On insurance, one thing that we require in B3B is the remainder of a reminder on the registration application about the importance of having appropriate levels of insurance that covers the homestay unit, the host and guest homestay unit. My goodness.
Mhm.
So we have at least an indication. I learned after trying to reinsure and looking around for insurance that some companies or underwriters will not insure short-term rentals. Some of them will only insure up to say 30 nights, and some of them will regardless of the number of nights. So we at least have an indication that they should check into insurance levels if they're going to do something above and beyond just a regular dwelling unit
Okay.
for homeowners.
Okay. And you at one point mentioned that you didn't have the ability to go in as a planning and zoning administrator. Is that something, did I miss that?
That is a segue into our next section.
Okay.
I was going to throw out just for those of y'all, this is the first time, if this is the first time you're seeing this. So this is only for less than 30-day rentals. If you rent your house for more than 30 days, then you don't pay transient occupancy tax. You don't have to keep track of any of this information. That's
Before we
separate.
move, Arnie, and you printed the faux short-term rental code or whatever I was wondering maybe where it says type A and B, maybe we make it really clear that it's this thing that Kate pointed out.
Oh, that's our existing code. Yes.
Yes. I mean, just where it says type A and type B, maybe we specify the amount of nights, so it's put there with the type A and B, so it's,
Yeah.
I mean, is there a way to be like, well, this is type A and it's this many nights and
Yeah,
this is
Yeah.
type
right.
B and it's this many nights.
So it's together as opposed to the way it's split up now, is your point.
Well, or just maybe it's reinforced, because you said there was some confusion that some people had, whether they were A or B or
Mhm.
what nights they were renting for, or what they were, how many they were running out of or something. So maybe,
A fact sheet
Yeah.
that gets the condensed.
yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, in the definition itself in section A, where all the definitions that apply to this section, where it gives you the definition of type A and type B, and then further on down, it lists you in certain zoning districts what your maximum number of nights are. But I think correct me if I'm wrong, your recommendation would be perhaps to add something to the definitions for type A and type B about the maximum number of nights. So that it's
just
there
make
and
it
reinforced and
yeah.
not lost necessarily in a later section.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. So there's
Okay.
maybe no confusion about that.
Okay, we're gonna make sure that in my mind, I'm not sure if I have it straight yet for what happens with R1, R2 and RLs and
Right.
RM versus RLC C1. But so we can go back and look at that. But Kate's point is valid in the sense that because nobody likes to read this type of language, even though it's lovely the way it's written. So we have a fact sheet that's put together that's a little bit more plain language that will say the number of the type A and the maximum number of nights.
And it says the amount of nights in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody gets.
Great.
And we have it posted online. So if anybody's interested, that's the
Okay.
first thing that
All
we
right.
point them to is, have you seen the fact sheet
Mhm.
for short-term rentals?
Okay.
So it's already there, at least in that form. We ready to move on to
Yeah.
B?
Yeah.
So in B1, B2, and B3, so the first one there on page 20 is that we have the ability to inspect a short-term rental once per year for compliance with applicable building codes, but not with applicable zoning codes.
Mhm.
So in my mind, it would be helpful for us to also be able to do a zoning inspection for compliance with all of the zoning items that we're talking about. Maximum number of nights, type A, type B, posting of certain information. And we're not asking for somebody to be burdened with 2 inspections. If we're going to do one, we're either both going or Steve says that he doesn't think it's necessary for that one and I go. So it's only 1 inspection, either with both of us or just one of us, to make that clear.
Mhm.
So in addition to the permitted inspection for compliance with building code regulations, should an inspection also be allowed for zoning regulations? We perhaps got a little bit too cute, but that's in blue. So the corresponding language later on is also in blue.
Oh.
Any questions about that particular one? If not, I'll move on to B2. When violations are discovered, the penalty is minimal. State code allows and this is a separate item. So the state code specifically in 15.2-983, which is just about 1 page of regulations strictly for short-term rentals. And it's put in a separate section from most of the other zoning code regulations. And it says that all violations that allows a fine of up to $500 for those operating without having a registration where a registration is required.
Mhm.
And then separate from that, we have in Article 18 of the zoning ordinance, violations for a limit. So the first violation is limited to $200 fine and the second one is a $500 fine. And just to point out, it takes a lot of staff time to receive the complaint, understand the complaint, if there are complaints, then to go out and do the inspection, document the violations, draft a notice of violation, have that served appropriately. And then ultimately, if nothing occurs that improves in 30 days, because they have the right to appeal anything that I do as a zoning administrator, then we have to do a summons and then we get the attorneys involved and the attorneys have to drive up from Salem. So that's all time consuming and expensive.
And sorry, is that all before the $200 fine?
Indeed.
Wow.
So then, just as an example, one of the spot inspections revealed an operator turned in through his Airbnb report that he had 42,000 in gross rental income. And a $205 fine isn't much of a deterrent, in my opinion. So it's just a consideration that should the penalties be increased for violations of the zoning regulations for short-term rental operations. And we're looking into, with our attorney, having gotten a response back, can we actually increase that? I found the section of zoning code, or sorry, state code at 15.22286 that talked about what zoning violation amounts were, and it had amount up to $1,000. I was trying to get clarification, and Leslie found another section in 2209 that had a higher amount. So that sort of highlights the importance of having the attorney look at that particular option before we go too much further into hopefully increasing the penalties for violations the one time and then the second time.
And hopefully, do you think that we'll have some more firm information
I hope so.
for next time?
Good.
Yeah.
I'm not quite certain, but I
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah.
So then if there are no questions there, and then the third item there on the bottom of page 20, sorry, I shouldn't have just written 3 STRs. So that's 3 short-term rental operations. We have some frustration that we cannot cancel or suspend them, just because the way it's written in item B at the bottom of the page there, 3 or more substantiated complaints. So the way I sort of interpret that is the neighbors have to call up, and neighbors are loath to call. We get very few calls. We hear about them sort of after the fact. Oh yeah, well, you didn't let us know, so it doesn't get on the not logbook, but on our sort of book for the number of complaints. So if we don't get those, then we can't go out and do much about it. But that's just for substantiated complaints, as opposed to us doing this annual inspection now, and we find 4 zoning issues like we did with these other ones, posting of properties exceeding the number of nights, that type of thing. So we would like some flexibility of adding in some enforcement there. So the item to consider is, in addition to the suspension or cancellation provisions for more than 3 substantiated complaints, should a short-term rental operation also be suspended or canceled for more than 3 violations of the zoning requirements related to the short-term rental operations? Is there any questions about how that's different, sort of substantiated complaints that are coming in from the public as opposed to what we witnessed when we did the spot inspections, which are violations of the zoning portion of the short-term rental rules and regulations?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good, actually, to have that, because you're right. People don't want to call in.
Mhm.
Then we have the existing language there, and then per direction, we also provide the entire section. And to sort of flip over, staff recommendation on the bottom of page 22, sort of to allow annual zoning inspections in addition to or coinciding with the building inspection. We would like that. And also number 2, increase the penalties if possible. And then next page on 23, number 3, allow broader powers for suspension or cancellation of the short-term residential rental registering for 4 more violations of any zoning provision related to short-term residential rental operations. And we have that outlined on page 23, C in safety, just as an example, striking, and this is language that I borrowed from either Charlottesville or Blacksburg, quite honestly, can't remember. So C1, the city may inspect any short-term rental once per year for compliance with applicable building codes. That's what we currently have, perhaps striking that and adding, by their application for short-term residential rental registration. Sorry, I thought I said that twice, but I didn't. An applicant authorizes city inspectors to enter the subject property upon reasonable advance written notice to the applicant at least one time during the calendar year for which the registration is valid, to verify that the short-term rental operation is being operated in accordance with the regulations set forth within this section, meaning the zoning section, and all applicable building codes. And then 2, the old 2 doesn't need to be there because that's folded into the very end of 1. So strike that and then add something new, which is the short-term residential rental registration forms shall also provide that as part of the registration, the host's failure to permit such an inspection as grounds for registration suspension, and makes them aware that if we are requesting inspection, they have to let us in. Otherwise, they run the risk of having their registration suspended.
What if you find a problem, and with some whatever they're not doing right, do you want to have the ability to go back and check to make sure that it has been addressed, or do you want to go back and to do another spot inspection because, well,
Sometimes I think they would want us to, I'm not sure we necessarily have to, but we can think about whether or not we write that in here, that follow-up inspections
Yeah.
are also allowed. But if they have a violation of some item, they're going to want it to allow us back in so that it's been addressed, checked off, and they're not suspended. So it's to
right?
their
I just think you might
benefit.
want to have the language in there to make it clear that because this says you're allowed at least one time, but it doesn't sort of say under what circumstances you would come in.
So follow-up inspections as needed, or
Follow-up inspections are allowed, maybe just to confirm compliance or,
okay, we'll come up with something.
Yeah.
Like in the case of violations or
Yeah.
something, right?
Right.
So that it doesn't appear to give blanket authority to inspect
right.
whenever you like.
Endlessly, yeah. Okay. So any questions about the C safety section with those two changes? Any additional questions? And then I'm gonna go through E, and then I've got one sort of to circle back on something that Leslie brought up late this afternoon. So in the registration section on the bottom of 23, B, that is an oddity in that the way the state code is written, it actually says more than 3 substantiated complaints, and we had 3 or more. So we need to just bring that into compliance with state code.
Mm.
And the funny thing is, we weren't the only ones doing it that way. The current code for both Charlottesville and Blacksburg is written that exact same way. So we all interpreted it wrong. And so we had to make a little adjustment there, not
Okay.
for anything that we're proposing this evening, but just make it compliance with state
Yep.
code.
Yeah.
D, a new item, more than 3 violations of any provision of this chapter related to short-term residential rental. Again, that's the zoning section. So we already have that for the 3 or so more than 3 substantiated complaints, but to add for a more than 3 violations of any provision of the zoning related items. If no questions there, then the new E, failure of the host to permit inspection of the home at least one time during the calendar year upon reasonable advance written notice to the applicant. And again, all of this falls under registration, suspension, or
I'm sorry.
cancellation.
What is reasonable advance notice?
It's not really,
Does that have to be defined or?
I'm not so sure. I mean, we're not going to say, let us in 15 minutes, a day or two, I think is reasonable.
The three,
If they're,
the 3 violations, is that at one inspection or is that like over 3
uh,
visits or whatever? Like,
I would say for a calendar year,
so
So-
if you inspected a short-term rental and let's say there were some building codes that there were safety things they weren't meeting and the logbook wasn't, I mean, is that 3 all at once or 3?
no, that's a
at
good
different
question. I'm
times.
not so sure I thought that through, thinking that we would probably be called out once and then we would inspect and then either see
Because
more than 3 or not.
right, especially somebody that was new may mess up 3 times at once, right? Or 3 different
Mm.
things at once, or
And quite honest, we'll have a little bit of leeway there. If it's somebody new and they just need to be reinforced with what, we're not going to immediately suspend them, even if it's 4 items or more. We will work with them. It's the folks that tend to perhaps
Use
not
it.
follow the
Yeah.
directions as much as
Yes.
they should. But we'll think about, does this need to be a calendar year or
like per visit or something,
Well, right. So it seems certainly that it would be for the calendar year, 3 over the calendar year, but it could be 3 in one visit too, right? Like if you're like,
yeah. That's what I'm saying.
if you're an egregious offender,
Yeah.
then it doesn't mean that you have to go back and make 3 visits. Because that would be burdensome to you.
yeah.
It's just something that think about it.
Yeah, probably good to clarify. Yeah.
We'll give that some more thought and amend as needed. Anything else for D and E? Then I'll come back. Leslie had a good point. There's in 15.2983, which is the state code. And I may not do a great job of sort of explaining this, but the realtors lobby is strong. And they have an exemption because I think they argued in front of the state when the state was developing short-term rental regulations that we could not sort of we couldn't require them to register when they already have a license as a realtor. And there are a couple of other folks too that are in this. When I say realtors, I'm grouping them in with the other 3 or 4 entities. So it would be sort of double asking them for the same sort of business, end up having more than one business license, even though it's a registration and one's license. So they were exempted or able to be exempted from, and I'll read it to you. No ordinance shall require a person to register pursuant to this section if such person is licensed by the real estate board or is a property owner who is represented by a real estate licensee. And then there are a couple of other things in here. Okay, well, fine. They don't have to register because they've gotten this exemption. But then there's another portion that says such ordinance may further provide that an operator required to register may be prohibited from offering a specific property for short-term rental in a locality upon multiple violations. So when we're talking about suspension or cancellation, it appears after rereading this that may not be able to be put upon or required of those that aren't required to register the way it's written. So it's possible that realtors and the other 2 or 3 entities that are not required to register would not fall under our ability to cancel or their registration. So perhaps to take care of that, which I'm not sure was necessarily intended, but I think you can certainly read it that way.
Right.
So on page 23 in E1, where it says a registration may be suspended or canceled for the following reasons, perhaps we add in a registration for an operator required to register may be suspended or canceled for the following reasons, and then have that A through E. So that just sort of doubly states that it only applies to those that are required to register because there are some exemptions in the state code.
So you're, just to clarify, so I hear what you're saying on that, but if you're a realtor, then you could run a short-term rental and not have to abide by that
Potentially
rule? Is
illegally.
that what you're saying?
Yeah,
I-
may not be
We
suspended.
met with them a long time ago. The head of the Realtors Association, their attorney said that your recourse is that you turn in the realtor for violating and let the Realtors Association handle it.
Hmm.
I don't know if they're really going to take time to do that, but yeah, they have a strong lobby.
So is the realtor, so is this a realtor who handles other people's Airbnb
Yeah, right.
rentals?
Mhm.
So
Their
they could,
own, right? If they had their
It
own.
could be their own, but it's
Right,
also
so-
meant for the
so-
property
so if
managers.
if one realtor was handling 10 Airbnbs, they could, okay.
We shouldn't say this too out loud, but yes.
Interesting.
It's
there's-
a
and
huge
there's no-
incentive to all of a sudden have a realtor
Yeah.
represent you as opposed to doing it yourself, and then perhaps not operating in compliance and then knowing full well that you can't be suspended or canceled.
Right. But if they don't have to register, I think I might be missing a piece of this. So if they don't have to register anyway, then suspending their registration is moot, right?
Mhm.
Well, correct. But then you could argue that we could take other zoning action
Right.
against them with the penalties but yeah, I think you're right.
And
If
that
you're not
remains the case,
registering-
right?
But here it gets more complicated, but well, it's always more complicated.
Yeah.
But we already read sort of part of 15.2-983.
Right.
And then the last one is the second to last one. Okay, no. Oh, no, it is. Except as provided in the section, nothing herein shall be construed to prohibit, limit, or otherwise supersede the existing local authority to regulate the short-term rental of property through general land use and zoning authority.
Right.
So we still have power, but we got to figure out what have we specifically lost by the exemptions?
Right.
So if we did, so I'm not sure I'm answering in that,
Mm.
yes, they don't have to register. We can't necessarily pull the registration, but what else can we do?
We could
to
still impose penalties,
penal-
right?
to penalize them for some of the infractions that have occurred.
I mean, the language that you've read doesn't seem to me to preclude that, does it?
Doesn't,
So this is another thing that's going to go to the attorney with the other
Yeah.
2 or 3 that we've
Yeah.
mentioned, since this is also something that we just learned. So I'm not sure we'll have something for you next time because we have to have the packet done in a week. And I'm not sure that we're going to get that back in a week's time.
Yep.
And I think that's all we have for short-term rental.
I have one, well, you had mentioned before on the actual short-term rental rule to take off the recycling, so that's under
Oh.
D2.
I forgot.
But on 14, let's see, B14, I think it's got a typo. I think just when we it says, it's talking about off-street parking. It says off-street parking, and I think it should have a comma. May, upon the recommendation of the planning commission and made part of a conditional use permit by the city council. I think it should have a comma again and say may not be required or may be reduced in number for the short-term rental. Right now it says off-street parking may, upon the recommendation of the planning commission and made part of a conditional use permit by the city council, not be required or may be reduced.
so
So
the comma,
to read 14, I think it just needs, it's got a typo in it.
so
I
the
think.
comma would come after the word may, right?
I think may needs to be moved to in front of not, and after off-street parking, you need a comma.
Sorry, what page are you on?
This is on the actual ordinance.
Ah.
On the second page, number 14, but read through that. I think it's got I think the may needs to be moved.
But you could put commas.
Yeah, and I would
That-
put commas.
Yeah,
in
you could
around.
put after the comma after may and a comma after,
Well, may will be moved.
Yeah.
So after parking, you'll have a comma, take out the may.
Yeah.
And then after city council, comma, and put the may there.
Yeah,
okay.
that'd be good.
And you are putting commas in that clause.
Yeah.
What is that? A split infinitive or something?
Okay.
So just to get back to the realtor, I just want to understand this a little bit better. So is there no way to require that the owner of the property still register?
No, there's no way to require that.
No way.
Is there under the umbrella of the realtor, the manager at that moment?
Okay. All right, thank you. Just wanted to clarify. All right, are we done with that then for now? Sounds like we will see that in possibly 2 weeks, but more likely a month. Yeah. Okie doke. All right, well then, is there, oh, did we have public comment? I'm gonna open and close public comment on that zoning ordinance amendment. Sorry about that. And we're gonna move on to the review of the community facilities and infrastructure chapter of the comp plan. So page 25. And this is our ongoing mission to get through all the sections of the comp plan so we know where we are. We'll start at the top and go down item by item. So if anybody has anything on CF 1.1.
I thought a lot of these, most of these were ongoing, and I definitely think that's
So
ongoing.
sing out if you think something is ongoing, please. Is 1.1, you think ongoing?
Yes, and I would point to the fact that Public Works has started redoing sidewalks to add more ADA.
So this is about a study though. Have we done this study?
I think just for the Public Works has done it themselves, not an official, not any.
Okay.
Contracted someone to do it.
Yep. Okay,
But looked at
so,
where we don't have the appropriate ADA access on sidewalks into intersections, like, I think at the end of your street, they added that.
Yeah, true.
okay. 1.2, integrate accessibility and safety into park facility designed to ensure that parks and playgrounds are safe and inclusive for all users. Certainly, we must do this.
Yeah. Most of our parks do have.
Right.
Swing accommodations and things like.
All right, so that's the first two get ongoing. CF 1.3, ensure equity in service delivery for all of Lexington's neighborhoods and demographics. I'm not clear on what service delivery is. Does anybody
Mhm.
know?
I'm not sure I have a good answer either.
I think it's any public works related, like when we did the playgrounds. Richardson Park was one of the first we did. And
So-
making sure that all neighborhoods are treated the same.
Right. So that sounds like that is also ongoing then,
Yeah.
to me.
I would
Yeah,
say
yeah.
yes.
All right, C4, investigate the need for a community center to provide quality facilities that promote lifelong learning and achievements for all residents. Have we done that? Have we investigated that? Okay, so that's not. Moving on to CF2, 2.1, review the city's building systems and use of renewable energy sources. Was that not something that I feel like somebody was talking about that?
I'm not sure
Well-
it's been done for all city buildings. I think at one point, somebody was suggesting that Waddell hit solar panels, but then we found out from the facilities people at the school that that would violate any sort of warranty that they had on that new roof.
On
So that didn't go anywhere. That's the only sort of investigating that.
And we looked at it for City Hall, but the roof wasn't suitable for that. The new DSS building will have solar panels on it. So I think it does get reviewed anytime there's a
Okay. So it sounds like that one
application.
gets shaded. CF 2.2, resolve the contingency water supply agreement with Rockbridge County due to the impracticability of piping water from Moores Creek Reservoir to the city's water treatment facility. What is that?
So, have you heard of Moores Creek Dam?
yeah.
So we have the city owns a reservoir
Right.
out the Moores Creek Dam, and it was originally intended to be a backup water supply for the city. Long time ago, the county was supposed to build a pipeline to it. I think they actually did build a pipeline to it. It was never used as a backup water supply, though. The pipeline in the meantime has deteriorated.
Mhm.
We're now looking at having to put a lot of money into the dam to maintain it. And we would like to no longer own the dam and maybe deconstruct the dam. So it's to get those conversations going, but there's no real.
Okay, so the contingency water supply agreement is that
Yeah.
the agreement is the pipe
Is maintaining that dam.
is maintaining the
Yeah,
dam? I
right,
see.
it's maintaining the
I
dam.
So
Gotcha.
if we got out of that requirement, then we could shut the dam down because there are a handful of people, I think, that actually get water from
Yeah.
there. So we can't just shut it down without going back to the county and resolving that agreement.
Ah,
It's been going on since this is a new item in the comp plan.
Yeah,
But even the 5 years ago when this was written, we were already spending money on flood inundation studies and other things
Mm.
and having to increase the spillway or at the height of the dam, which we did internally, which is increase the height. So we've been spending tens of thousands of dollars out there. And this is just sort of a placeholder to remind us to try to get out of that. I'm not sure how practical that part is.
so the city owns the reservoir.
Yeah.
And the dam
We had
and and the land around it?
we had hundreds of acres
Oh.
around it, but at some point, some of that was sold off to
Right.
Department of Forestry or some state entity, can't remember which, but they would not take, I think at that time, this is 20,
No
30
dam,
years ago.
no
maybe,
reservoirs.
They wouldn't take the dam itself. So we have the
Ah.
dam reservoir, some limited land around it, but then also some responsibilities for the roadway that takes you up to that property.
Interesting.
A lot of burden and
Yeah,
payoff.
Yeah, no benefit.
This is the one that issues in three, right?
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Right. I just didn't know what the contingency water supply agreement was. So
Yeah, it's
That-
actually
that's
part of the
helpful.
joint services agreement, but that's fine if leave it like it is.
okay, so that's not getting changed. CF 2.3, evaluate the feasibility of implementing a stormwater fee to fund improvements to the city's stormwater management system. Would that be a tax? Would that,
It's a fee
Thing.
and it starts
That's
this year. We've approved,
That should be colored in for
yeah,
sure.
that should get color coded.
All of your um,
I would put
bills will be
complete. It's actually in
increased
two
shortly.
phases. I don't know if we have to wait till the second phase, but it is being done.
And what's the fee?
it's dependent on your residential equivalency unit, so it's based on how much impervious area you have.
Okay. Great.
You will see that on your bill before long.
Okay. All right, so CF 2.4 is already colored in. CF 2.5, repair and upgrade the city's sewer lines to address inflow and infiltration to protect water quality and ensure sewer capacity is maintained. Yeah,
Definitely being done.
It's definitely, yeah, ongoing.
it is ongoing. Yeah,
Mhm.
great. CF 2.6, implement cemetery improvements that support the financial sustainability and viability of the facilities by increasing burial capacity. We expanded Oak Grove
Both of them.
and
Both.
Greenwood, yeah. So that one gets colored in. CF 2.7, ensure the new development assesses impacts on public facilities and infrastructures and adequately mitigates impacts specifically attributable to that development. That seems like something that happens just through the planning
It
process.
does.
Yeah, stormwater in particular is a good example of that. If you add impervious area, then you have to meet state requirements for retention, detention as an example.
But also even
Even water
traffic
and
studies that are
sewer.
required if you tip over that. Okay, so that one gets filled in. CF 2.8, regularly evaluate the refuse and recycling program to identify cost-effective improvements and opportunities for program expansion. When was the last time that happened?
Actually, that green infrastructure team, whatever they're called now, the
Healthy green neighborhoods.
healthy, thank you.
Mhm.
I think Jamie said they were actually gonna look at recycling again.
Oh, good.
Isn't that right?
That sounds vaguely
I think,
familiar.
somebody said that recently. I'm almost positive it was from that group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to CF 3.1, evaluate administrative. All right, that's already done, completed. CF 3.2, reconstruct the public works complex to provide safe, functional, and operationally efficient facilities. Any movement on that? No.
That's in our CIP, and I'm not sure how many years that's out, but it's out, I think, a ways.
Okay. And then 3.3 and 3.4 already ongoing. CF 3.5, ensure that improvements of the public realm, sidewalks, curbs, and street trees are planned and executed in an integrated, coordinated manner when undertaking upgrades to sewer, water, or road infrastructure. Is that happening with North Main Street in front of VMI? Are they?
Yeah, they're doing everything. They're doing
Right.
not just the road, but right, exactly, the sidewalks.
Moving water lines, yes.
Now, do we, I don't know that we always do that. Like, I know that there've been a bunch of improvements on, well, I don't know, what was it, a Still Street?
We
Where they
try
dug up-
to do that.
I'm sorry?
We try to do that, but then we've gotten a few water breaks after
Right.
we've paved a street, or
Right.
Columbia Gas comes in after we've paved the street and wants to.
They're like, we're gonna do this.
Right.
Yeah.
My understanding is Public Works makes all the utilities aware. I think the beginning of the year, we plan to do this many projects and this street is going to be opened up and try to coordinate with them, but it doesn't always work because they're not able or their program is different. And then they come in and
Right.
out of unbeknownst to us. And all of a sudden you have somebody like Brightspeed wanting to do all this new work for their fiber, or the gas company just all of a sudden has a program, and you just have to do the best you can with that.
Right. So I wonder if that's something for the city council to take up and see if that wants to be reworded to coordinating rather than ensuring, like coordinate with,
Yeah,
with
right.
with other related entities. And so that one sounds like also gets filled in since it happens sometimes, and we try to do it.
Try.
All right, CF 4.1 and 4.2 are already filled in. 5.1, perform periodic studies and surveys of adequacy, quality, effectiveness, and equity of city service delivery, including service expansion. What do we think? Is that
I can't think of when we've done anything like that recently.
okay? So that one stays. 5.2, coordinate and support internal, local, and regional partnerships for shared services, infrastructure, and facilities that benefit city residents and entire sustainable and cost-effective services. So would this be like, is this something that you think that we're doing?
Yeah, let's say.
Could you give us an
Come
example?
up with an example.
It just discussions with Threshold and
Yeah.
land banks and whatnot through the housing studies that have happened recently,
Mhm.
that perhaps there's a more regional effort for land banks and other things. So there's definitely discussion about that and trying to coordinate
Yeah.
those efforts.
Our MSA is kind of an example of
Mhm.
that too.
Right. And I guess any kind of efforts that we do through the Central Shenandoah Planning District would fall under that if
Yeah.
there were. Um,
The region.
okay. So CF 5.3, include public and private utility providers in the planning stage of all infrastructure and development projects to determine needs and upgrades as part of project development. Is that something that we already do?
I think that's what I mentioned a bit ago about that coordination. As I understand it, it happens with the Public Works Department on
Okay.
that yearly basis
Yeah,
where they
that-
invite
right.
the utilities in.
Okay, and then CF 5.4, continue partnerships. I assume that means that we were already doing them.
Yeah, right.
So anything that starts with the word continue seems like it ought to be filled in. CF 5.5, conduct a comprehensive fire and rescue needs assessment and facility plan to address space needs and maximize fire and rescue response times.
Yeah.
Why is that in there? I mean, the fire department is very new.
They've had some issues where with the building. So I don't know if that's what what sort of
What
gets
got it
this
in here?
particular thing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that and more regional too, to look at where they are, but right. You know, when we did the comprehensive plan, we had interviews with all the key stakeholders, so I'm guessing the chief suggested that one. And I don't know that, I don't think anything's really been done on that I know
Okay,
of.
so sounds like we don't fill that one in.
Yeah, I wouldn't fill
Yeah.
that one in.
Okay.
I do have a problem with the word maximize, just reading it again. Wouldn't we want to minimize the fire and rescue response times?
Yes. Wow. Yes.
Right.
Wow. Nice catch.
Do that one just on our own.
Okay, CF 5.6 is another continue, as is 5.7 through continued participation. 5.8 is already filled in, and 5.9, work with the health system and other health providers to implement the Rockbridge Area Community Health Assessment where possible.
Yeah, and I think that's not a city-led one. That's where one of our partners,
Right. But you think that's being done?
yeah, I do
Yeah,
think that's being
okay.
done. I know they have regular meetings and
Okay, so it looks like we are adding ongoing status to CF 1.1, CF 1.2, CF 1.3, CF 2.1, CF 2.3, CF 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, CF 3.5, CF 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.6, 5.7, and 5.9. All right. We're doing well in that section of the. All right. Well, is there any public comment? Okay, I'm gonna open and close that public comment section. And commission discussion, does anybody have anything else that they like to?
No, but what is a land bank? I haven't heard that term.
I gotta think. A land bank is a organization, and as I think of it, when I was being set up in Brunswick, right before I was leaving. So it's organization that can accept properties from the locality or for any other institution. And what they do, I think in particular, well, is that they can sort of clean up the back taxes. So if you have a problem property that has, nobody knows who the owners are, the error issue, and their back tax issues, the locality can donate the property to the land bank. That sort of wipes away the back tax issues. They can then direct it if there are specific sort of goals to get it to affordable family or families that need affordable housing, or they do it with market rate developers. So they direct how that property can either be torn down. Sometimes they invest in the demolition. And so they get the property back into a productive status through the mechanisms and the powers that they have. So that's why it's a bank. You actually like sort of stick it in the bank, and you can either sort of bank properties, and if it's all in one area, then you can have a bigger impact, but most of the times these end up being scattered sites. So that's a way to sort of clean up the back issues with the taxes and then get it out into some productive manner.
Helps to. I don't.
All right, then I'm gonna close that section and we're gonna move on to other business. Do we have a zoning and planning report?
We do or a couple items. Thomas Wagner, just as an FYI, in the Public Works Department, he and I met with the WNL Engineering Club students. They like to take on a project on occasion. This is not classwork related necessarily. So this is on their own, and they're hoping by the end of this semester, which is a short semester because it's only 4 weeks, they may have a project for us or a completion for us. What we had asked them to do was to look at, there's a section of the bike ped plan. We have prioritized projects in the bike ped plan, which take us along Waddell Street from South Main. And the first segment is to Wallace. And we're fortunate to have that funded through a TAP grant through VDOT, and VDOT is managing that project. This next segment after that is from Wallace Street, pretty much right in front of Maury River, over by the bubble pool, municipal pool lot, through private property into Houston Street. So what we asked them to do, because one of our CIP items that we added for this year was for a portion of that. So to start at Wallace Street, and where the curb for that driveway is just for us to put in a 5-foot sidewalk to sort of continue that. Because ultimately we want to also go down from Houston Street through Miller Street to get to the back of the Don Tequila shopping center. Not to feed everybody through to Don Tequila specifically, but to just get them to the shopping opportunities in general that are over there. So what we asked the students, because there's a nice grass walk that if you follow the fence line for the municipal pool, so they're going to shoot some grades and figure out to get from the corner of Wallace Street sort of up the grassy hill, if they can put a 5-foot wide sidewalk walkway in there to get to the entrance to the municipal pool. That's going to be their project that they're taking on in addition to the classwork that they already have. This again is a club, so it's not course related necessarily.
Great project.
Yeah.
We hope to hear from them in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Otherwise, it won't be until they come back
Mhm.
next
Would,
fall.
would they bring it to us and
We could, we'll figure out
do a
what kind of
presentation?
figure out what type of sort of product it is.
Mhm.
And if it's a nice drawing and whatnot, we can certainly present it. Maybe ask them if they're willing to present it here as well. We
I
can
think that
certainly
that would
inquire.
be, I mean, if they're willing, that would be a great experience for them and it would be informative for us.
True. And then the other thing to add is that we are also going to put in for that entire segment from Wallace Street all the way over to Houston Street in this next cycle, which occurs this summer for TAP. So TAP is every 2 years. TAP stands for Transportation Alternatives Program, I think. And that 2 years ago, we were awarded the first segment in front of Moore River Middle School. But we're going to go ahead and put in for the next segment this year and hope for the best for that segment. We also learned today an interesting tidbit that there was a scam with your name on it, believe it or not.
My name?
And it went to Tim Hickman and Kim Hickman. Somebody had the audacity to go on to our website, find the details out for the sign that you approved earlier today, sent the Hickmans an email with your name on it saying, as Shannon Spencer is planning director or planning chair with Rockbridge County Planning Department. So that somebody had gone on, gotten into our packet, saw that there was a project, pulled the details out of the sign and said, your project with all the details has been preliminary approved. Please submit the payment for the invoice. And there was an invoice attached.
Oh, my
$5,000.
Wow.
So they called up, how do we pay this invoice? And then they realized that when they got the invoice, that it was just wrong.
Yeah.
So just to get the word out, that people are getting a little bit more sophisticated in their scamming.
Scam.
We don't think it was you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So,
Yeah.
so is there any, do I need to be concerned about this?
I don't think so. I think it was, we made the police department aware. We're gonna do a
Fine.
public service announcement.
They clearly had, I mean, they went through the packet. That's your name as the chair.
Yeah.
It wasn't from, when I first heard about it, before I saw it, but oh, her email's been hacked, but no.
No.
It came from an email, lexingtonva.gov@usa.com.
Oh.
Many things that looked almost right.
Right.
Then from our agenda, that's when they picked up the county because we're in the county building.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Right,
They gave
It
the
was-
address at 150 South Main.
right.
Hmm.
All sorts of things that, yes, okay, like you said,
We
not
will-
quite right. Wow.
make our applicants aware just to be warned, don't
Yeah.
pay.
Yeah.
At least this wasn't asked to be paid in debit cards or some of the other scams that are happening. But just to share that with you that they're getting more sophisticated and now they're sort of getting into our world, which we didn't really expect perhaps.
Terrible.
That's, I'm dumbfounded. Okay, well, that's alarming.
Can
Thank
I,
you.
one
Yeah,
last
Yeah,
thing,
please.
we do not have anything for your next agenda. No applications for you. The only thing that we would have is the very last chapter in the comp plan, and that's a very short chapter and wouldn't take long. So the question is, would you prefer to meet for that just one really short chapter, or could we put that on to your next agenda?
I think
Otherwise, there's
I think-
nothing else.
option B
Mhm.
would be,
So we'll go
Sounds
ahead and
like a
cancel
plan.
the next meeting.
Okay.
And then that also gives us a little bit more time for the short-term rental stuff to be
Perfect.
hopefully put together. That's all. I have.
Great. Thank you. All right. Leslie, do you have a city council report?
Couple items. We met last Thursday. We had a discussion on whether to engage in town gown discussion with WNL and BMI. We, we came up with a very vague motion for the city manager to at some point talk with them to see if there's any topics they want to discuss. We didn't identify that we have any problems, but just trying to put a meeting together. And we also, for new business, had a consideration of a resolution for policy on meetings by electronic communications. And that allows, it was actually a renewal of it. We have to do it annually, but city council is, and all the boards and commissions, including this one, if you can't attend a meeting, there's certain circumstances where you can attend electronically.
Ah,
So if you're taking care of somebody who's sick, or you are sick yourself, or for personal reasons, you can do it up to 25% of the meetings out of the year. So, keep that in mind if you're on vacation and really want to participate on our meeting, we could probably work it out to where you can participate
so
electronically.
We would be up there. Is that?
Yeah, right,
Mm.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we approved a memorandum of understanding with the Economic Development Authority for fire suppression systems, the fire suppression systems incentive loan program. So have you all heard about that? Yeah, so that's moving forward. So this
Great.
is a good first
That's
step, and
fantastic.
they're pretty close to starting to actually, they have already contacted, they've sent out a flyer to all the downtown businesses saying that this program's available. They now have the authority to implement the program, and they've had 3 people inquire about it. So some interest in it already.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, we have come to the end. Anyone?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.